Hello, welcome to the Field of Screams podcast. Today we'll be covering the 2010 Nightmare on Elm Street Reboot. There is a lot surrounding this movie. There's a lot of people that do not like it. There's a lot of people that hate it. And there's a few and a couple people that do like this movie. I recalled I first watched this when I was in middle school. I believe I was in middle school. And I had watched it a couple of times through middle school and high school, and I actually liked it whenever it came out. I was a big defender of it. I never really understood why people didn't like it, and I hadn't watched it in a while till now. And as I was going through the series, I was actually pretty excited for this movie. I'm going to be honest, I thought I was going to be a pretty big defender of this movie, but as I watched it, it has been quite a while since I had watched it before. And as I was watching it, I was getting some of the criticisms. I was like, okay, I'm starting to see where a lot of people don't like some things here. And we're going to talk about it. I'm going to start with the obvious. If you are going to remake a Nightmare on Elm Street movie, you got to come with a really good idea. And I think the approach you got to go for, you got to go with a pretty dark tone, which I think the creators of this movie were going for. There are a lot of scenes that I did like. I liked the tone of it. The atmosphere was dark. The characters were really struggling. They had some really cool things, like the micro-napping. That was really neat. I really liked that. I liked how they added that into. There was the grocery store scene. And it happened a few other times, and it creates a little more uncertainty, which you need in a Nightmare on Elm Street movie. Some of the best scenes are where the characters are living their everyday lives, and then all of a sudden you think, ah, crap, they were dreaming, and then they're in Freddy's world, and now they're on the run. That's what makes these movies fun, and that's what can make them scary. I also think the best approach for Freddy is to go with a very mean, very messed up Freddy, a very dark Freddy, and they also went that direction with this one. There's the scene where it was either a dog or a cat, I'm trying to remember, but it's killed, and one of the characters sees it, and Freddy's literally sitting by it, and he kind of laughs, and he's like, I was just petting it. It's a very dark joke. It's not really funny, But it gets his meanness down. We didn't need Freddy's dead type Freddy. We didn't need part 5 or part 4 Freddy. Those were a little too funny. And I think if you try to start off a Freddy Krueger that way, I don't think it would work very well. You're trying to replace a Robert Englund Freddy, which is very hard. Everyone loves Robert Englund. His Freddy was very, very good. It worked with his personality. He was able to execute it really well. So trying to start off right away with jokes, that wouldn't work well at all, I don't think. So I do think they had the right direction, going with a very dark Freddy, having that dark atmosphere. And those are things I did like. Now, usually for this, I kind of do a beat for beat, throughout the movie. I've been doing it for the whole series, but as I was watching it, I was like, I don't really think I gotta walk through most of the highlighted scenes, because a lot of them are kind of just redone scenes. And that's kind of a criticism that a lot of people have towards this movie. There's a lot of reused scenes, and some of them don't really hold up well to the originals. For example, the iconic kill where, the rotating room type kill. The older movies have done that type of kill a few times. We had it in the part 1. We had an upgraded version, A New Nightmare. And this is the next movie coming off A New Nightmare. And that kill isn't as good as the one in New Nightmare, in my opinion. Wherever he's got the babysitter, he's dragging her up the wall, the ceiling, and you actually see Freddy walking on the walls and ceiling, and they're not using CGI, which, by golly, they should not have used as much CGI as they did in this film. I think CGI is kind of the downfall of some of the scenes throughout this movie. The scene where Freddy kind of leans into the wall, and you see his face and his hands. In the original movie, that is done very good. In this movie, as soon as it happens, you're like, oh man, holy CGI town. It doesn't look good at all. And I was kind of like, oh, I think I see why people did not like this movie, because there's more CGI than I remembered. So that's another thing, like a big nitpick I would have is they did way too much CGI compared to the originals where they didn't have that. So they had to be really creative and use special effects, and it felt like, the different scares and the different things Freddy was doing, like it took a lot of time, and here it kind of feels like a shortcut whenever you use too much CGI. Especially like around the 2010, the CGI doesn't age well. Now, granted, when it came out, like I was all for it, I was just a kid in middle school, and I thought it was awesome. And probably when I was in middle school, like I probably didn't remember the OG very well. So whenever I watched this one, I was like, oh man, this stuff's really cool. He has like a girl flying around the room and he's killing her. But now that I'm marathoning these, I'm kind of like, we've seen this a couple of times, and I don't think it's as good as the old times. So I definitely see the criticisms in that. So, we got a lot of repeat type kills, repeat scenes. We got the body bag scene. I really wish they would have changed it up in a way. I'm going to get more onto that like towards the end of the film, or the end of this review. But, I'm just kind of describing like the nitpicks that I see and that I felt while watching this movie. I definitely think it played a part. And, since we're talking about looks, I'll just talk about Freddy Krueger's look. It's been criticized to death. Like, he does look like kind of a burnt mole rat, which isn't very good. The one thing people are going to care about a reboot, and if we're going to move on with this series, this is the look of Freddy Krueger. And when I first heard that, they wanted him to look more like a burnt victim, I was like, oh, that sounds cool. That sounds scary. But here, I don't think it's really that scary. He looks kind of goofy. And I think there's even like CGI on his face. Like, it's not a great look. If you're going to have a good looking Freddy Krueger, I think it's got to be, again, it's got to be in the makeup and the masking and all that, which I know makes for a very long process for the actor who plays him. But let's be honest, like, if you're going to be in a Nightmare on Elm Street movie, millions and millions of people are going to watch you. You're going to get your name out there. Like, you're going to get a lot of hype. It's going to open doors for you. So, maybe you should be open to that. The cast of the characters, I really didn't have a problem with. A lot of people criticize them. I know a lot of people criticize the main lead that plays Nancy, which it is a tough role to fill Heather Langenkamp's shoes. Because she is a beloved figure, throughout the series. It's like, if they're trying to recreate a Scream movie and you're trying to replace Neve Campbell. It's kind of hard to do. A lot of people gave Melissa Guerrera a hard time, when she was like the new main lead girl in Scream 6. It's tough. It's tough to fill that final girl's shoes, and you're going to draw criticism either way. I've heard rumblings that she made a comment that this was just a paycheck she was going to collect. I really didn't fact check it. But, future actors and actresses out there, if you ever take a role and you're going to star in a movie that involves a pretty big franchise, probably don't make a comment like that. Because the diehard fans, they've been waiting for this movie for a while. And if you are going to make a comment like that, like, even if it's true, I'm sure if I was an actor, there would probably be movies I would take, that have a pretty big paycheck. And I'd be like, oh, heck yeah. Like, I'm not even a fan of this. I'll do it, though. It's a lot of money. Who wouldn't do that? We're all human. But don't say it out loud. Don't say it near press where they can record you and, it becomes an article online and then people hate you for it. But regardless, a lot of people say she was stiff and not a lot of emotion. But, I do think in a movie about sleep deprivation, you're probably going to have that kind of a role. Like, there are some people I said they thought Heather Langenkamp acted a little too lively in the first film. For a girl who hasn't been sleeping upon days upon days. I don't know if anyone's ever pulled an all-nighter, but usually the very next day, I kind of feel like a zombie. I'm not exactly the most emotional person. So, that criticism, even though she wasn't like the most lively person, like, and I think it's okay. I think that's okay sometimes, as long as it's not boring. And I think sometimes there's a couple plot threads in this movie that go on a little too long that didn't exactly help our main characters. But overall, I was okay with them. You know, like the film overall had kind of an emo look. And I feel like the characters kind of brought that. You know, they're kind of using drugs to try to stay awake. You know, there wasn't a time where I was like, man, these characters suck. I was like, nah, they're all right. Like I'm all right with these people. There is one thing I think this movie did a good job with, and there are a lot of cool transitions and different shots. You know, there's a scene where Nancy's kind of walking, and she like turns, and it becomes like winter in her room, I think it was, and like it kind of transitions to like Freddy's like origin story type deal. But the transition to like the snowy scene, that was pretty cool. There's also the shot where like they're looking at the picture where they're in preschool, and then like it transitions to real life. There are a lot of cool scenes that kind of transition that way. And I was kind of like, oh, that's a neat little trick there. That I like that. I know it's a very small thing, but you know, as I'm watching it, like it felt cool. It felt cool watching that. Now I'm gonna address the elephant in the room with this movie. When I was first starting this series, and it was kind of something I've seen like in comments all the time, like a lot of people, they would get mad at this movie because they're like, oh, Freddy's a pedophile. And, you know, I would always kind of jump to its defense. I'm like, well, you know, let's think back to the original, the OG. Like, Wes Craven always intended for Freddy Krueger to be a pedophile in his movie. But they kind of did away with that because there was headlines of, like, major figures, like, doing that stuff's disgusting. You know, and the studio's like, we don't want to go there. Like, let's not. So they, like, cut it out from the movie, and, like, I felt like it was always kind of hinted at, but they never actually said it on camera. I think in part 5, there's, like, a newspaper clipping where, like, it says that he did. You know, but they never come out and say it out loud in the movie. And I was like, you know, Freddy's doing all these things, telling Nancy, I'm your boyfriend now, Nancy. Doing the whole tongue and the phone thing. Being pretty invasive. You know, she's in the bathtub and he puts his hand up between her legs, which this movie remade that same scene. You know, they did way too many iconic scenes, just doing it again for the sake of rebooting it. You know, Freddy Krueger chasing Nancy, doing that tongue thing, that like he did that to Nancy, he did that to Jesse in number 2. Like he kind of did it throughout the whole franchise. So initially, when people were making that criticism, you know, I was kind of like, oh, come on, like Freddy was never a saint. Freddy was always meant to be like this dirty, nasty guy. We were never actually truly meant to root for him. You know, it just kind of came that way later in the series when Robert Englund did so well, and, you know, they had some funny punchlines before kills, and I always thought that people, you know, fell too much in love with Freddy Krueger, you know, and that's where, like, the kind of resentment stems with this reboot. But kind of watching the movie now, you know, like, this movie spends, like, a long time, like, showing these high school kids, like, as actual kids, my preschool kids. And, like, as you're watching the scene, you know, like, it's showing flashbacks of them, and Freddy Krueger playing with them, like, at his, like, little preschool thing that he had. You know, like, he's literally, like, playing games with them, and then, like, it actually comes to the fact that he had Polaroids of, like, nasty things he did with the kids. And, like, once you're watching that, like, it feels dirty. It really does. And then I kind of got vibes that, like, once they kind of, like, established that and you got the dirty feeling, you know, and then Freddy kind of comes back and he's doing, like, all these perverse jokes. I talk about a wet dream and, you know, like, being really perverted with Nancy, like, kind of just sliding his metal claw up Nancy's leg and making all these jokes, and it's kind of like it does feel too much. Like, this is way too much. You know, before, like, yeah, Freddy was creepy with Nancy and all that, but once you get to, like, the backstory and you see them as, like, little kids and, you know, they're, like, Polaroids and stuff, like, I don't know, it's just, like, the fact that you watch it on screen, like, it does feel icky. It feels very, very icky. And you should never feel clean, while talking about Freddy Krueger again. Like, he is not a saint. Like, in the OG, he kills kids. Like, he's not a clean dude. But, like, once you kind of get that little backstory and then he's making those little sexual jokes, it feels worse than it did before, for whatever reason. I mean, I don't want to say for whatever reason. It's a very severe thing and very grotesque thing. But I feel like it almost launches Freddy in too bad of light. Another thing about the backstory, we spend a long time on a little subplot of, like, the kids thinking that he's good, that he was an actual innocent man that was murdered unnecessarily. And as you're watching it, you're just kind of like, dude, like, this is Nightmare on Elm Street. Like, Freddy is not innocent. And, like, part of me is like, they better not go that route. I don't know, like, it's a wild subplot they inserted in. We spend so long in the OGs of Freddy just being this evil figure, that he was made because of a nurse that got surrounded by like 1,000 psychos, like, the ultimate incarnation of evil. And then they're like, oh, he might be innocent. And it's like, what? No, he's not. Stop it. Like, this whole mystery subplot, like, it's not going to go anywhere. And it doesn't go anywhere. Like, you find out he's even more gross than they mentioned in the OG films. So it just seems like they spend way too much time doing that, where they could have been doing things a lot more useful. Now, what useful things could they be doing? And this is just something that's kind of stemmed in my mind from recent stuff that I've watched. We've had the hit movie Smile that just came out. And we've even had Stranger Things Part 4, with the whole Vecna subplot, him working within dreams. And I think a lot of that, they said they were inspired by Nightmare on Elm Street. We're getting these recently made things that are playing with hallucinations and dreaming. And man, there's a whole lot that this franchise can be doing, especially present day with the technology and the practical effects that we could be having. In the movie Smile, like, there's so many scenes that you don't know what's really going on, if it's a dream, if it's real. And that movie used that to its advantage greatly. And, every time I watch Smile, or whenever I watch Season 4 of Stranger Things, like, I just kept thinking, man, they really need to get on the Nightmare on Elm Street series. Like, they could be doing great stuff right now. Like, there's people that are making great products that could join the Nightmare on Elm Street franchise and take it to another level. And I think that's where a lot of people's disappointment comes when they hate this reboot. Because they're like, oh, they could do great things. And then they go watch it, and then they're like redoing scenes, and there's a lot of CGI, and, the whole pedophile thing. Like, they did some unnecessary things to try to revamp this franchise, and some of it was just kind of like, why did they go that route? Why did they show this? Why did they do that? Why are we floating around that Freddy might be innocent? There's different things that we could be doing that could just restart the whole franchise. We don't necessarily need a new Nancy. We could go with a new character if we want. I don't know. I just think there's more interesting routes we could go with Nightmare on Elm Street. And we haven't had a movie in 14 years. Like, I think we're pretty due. Halloween, they churn them out all the time. Friday the 13th, like, they're trying to do stuff. They haven't done stuff in a while either. So hopefully someone can get this franchise started again. And when they do, hopefully they don't, like, remake a lot of the same typical scenes in Nightmare on Elm Street. We've seen those before. Let's do new stuff. Now, again, to summarize this, like, I don't hate this movie. I really don't. I think it's just more of, like, I had a love for this movie in middle school and high school, and, like, now that I watched it, I see some of its flaws. There's still some parts I like. I like the atmosphere overall. I think it had cool transition shots. I think it had, the micro-napping was pretty cool. I think some of Freddy's brutal lines were delivered pretty well, and I thought they were cool themselves. I think in general, when they were laying out this movie, they had the right idea. They were going to go a very dark route. I think there was too many different subplots and all that stuff, and the CGI, it kind of killed the hype, and it's made a lot of people hate this movie. So I might not hate this movie as a lot of other people do, but I also don't love it compared to middle school and high school. Like, I'm kind of floating in between here. I would say it's above average. I don't think it's a terrible reboot, but I also don't think it's as good as the Friday the 13th reboot. Or maybe even the Chainsaw Massacre reboot. That was like in 2003. It's been a while since I've seen that movie too, so maybe I shouldn't speak too soon. But yeah, overall, like I'm kind of mixed. I see its flaws. I see some great things. And I hope eventually we get this franchise going again sometime soon. But I mean, this is, the final review of all the Friday the 13th movies. So we do got to rank them. So we are going to do that. So stay tuned. If you want to see that, subscribe so you know when it comes out. Give this review a like. It helps out the channel. It gets it out to other people. And again, thank you so much for listening. And until next time.